Say what?
Hello and welcome back, my friends. It is time for Say What, where we hear from those connected to the industry about what's going on in our world of electrical apprenticeship. And this does include any topics that you've suggested, so please keep those coming. I'm your host, Cindy Sandifer. I am a huge fan. That's probably an understatement. I'm a huge fan of our guests today. They are truly some of my very favorite people. Their knowledge and experience are phenomenal, and their passion for our industry is tangible. But what I love and appreciate the most is their heart. They care about people, and it shows. Now, I want to make a special note. This episode is being recorded on March 12th, 2025. So depending on when it airs, when you're listening to it, some things may have changed. So just keep that in mind. Please help me welcome Jim Cole, Lucas Aubrey, and Rob Duston. Okay, super important to note. We are recording this episode on March 12th. Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. It is roughly 10:23 a.m. Typically, I would not do this on a podcast, but because of the rapidly changing landscape, it's possible that some of the information we say right now will have changed by the end of the day. So, pointing that out, second point out, this moment is not to be considered legal advice. So, for all the listeners, you are not allowed to say, Lucas, Rob, or Jim said. This is information only, this moment. And I'm sure many of our listeners know you all if they've been around for any period of time. But just in case, will you please just introduce yourselves, name, and the firm that you are with? Rob, you can go first.
Rob Duston, and I'm with Saul Ewing here in Washington, D.C., and been doing this stuff way too long.
Best answer.
Hi, I'm Jim Cole. I'm with Groom Law Group. I've been doing it, well,
Almost
30 years.
Not quite as long.
Probably too long.
I'm Lucas Aubrey. I'm with Shorman Dunn in Washington, D.C., and I've been doing this a medium amount of time.
So we've got a little bit of experience. And yeah, there you go. Not quite done yet is what I'm hearing from Lucas. The other two I'm not sure about. You join us at all things. You're at NTI. You're at regionals. The new training director, committee seminar. You've hosted webinars, seminars, shared documents, provided answers and guidance to the ETA, JTCs, AJTCs. My God, you cover selection procedures, ERISA, standards, nuts and bolts, lines of separation, policy, procedures and changes, EEO, all the other acronyms, and we could just go on. So I would say you basically cover anything and everything apprenticeship. I think, would that be, okay, that's sufficient. So we know that everyone can't attend everything, like all the JTCs, all of our industry and apprenticeship folks. So we we're like, ooh, let's do a podcast to discuss some things that, we typically might talk about in an event or things that are happening and going on, what's impacting IBW NECA training. Now we're in this moment of there's constantly every day, maybe a couple times a day, something new. So it's like we're doing some of the typical things today, and we're also kind of diving into what's going on in this moment that might be impacting us. So I say let's just jump in to what's going on, what people need to know. So Rob, I think, do you want to help us, guide us?
Well, I'll set the stage, and I will start by saying, our firm is a national firm that, management and business firm, and apprenticeship programs are part of that. But we have a huge higher education practice, do a lot of employment law, represent contractors, all kinds of business, all kinds of industries. So collectively, our clients, many of our clients are hit by this, and even the ones who are not directly affected are wondering what's going to happen here in the next few months, what's going to happen to the economy, what's the effect of all of this on business and on this massive deregulation. And we actually put together some guidance for our own lawyers that, of course, then our general counsel went and had to add a whole bunch of sites to. But here's the message that we are sending internally and that I'm sending to you. There are a lot of areas that are in flux and have changed or are likely to change. And that's just the case. And you're going to hear about some of those today. And virtually everything we talk about, it's topics that have changed, might change. We're worried about things that are going to change. The pace across multiple agencies is just unprecedented. So is the speed of staffing and budget cuts. As of today or yesterday, they just announced more cuts for the Department of Education, slicing the smallest agency in the federal government in half between retirements and layoffs. Much of this is driven the uncertainty about the budget bill and what's going to be in it, if it passes, will it pass next week, how much discretion is going to be done to not follow whatever Congress had allocated in prior years. All of those are big unknowns. Much of this is executive order and DOGE driven, but not all of it. A lot of this is Trump administration officials, appointees, interim appointees, who are following through on plans that this administration has been preparing for the last year. So as a result of that, things are moving very fast, and they came in prepared to do change, and they're doing a lot of change. Announcements one day may change within the week, may not, but that's something we've seen here back and forth. And all of this is being matched by dozens, if not hundreds, of lawsuits, legal challenges, temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions, what's in effect, what isn't, all of those things that are a mess to keep track of, even for lawyers. And this state of uncertainty has caused a lot of our clients to be concerned about their business and to come and ask for help. And in many cases, we up here, despite our experience, or your lawyers, are not going to know the answer. The answer is going to be, I don't know. They will go off and think about it. They will, talk to colleagues, talk with those with more experience, consult us, and they still may come back and say, I don't know the answer. I'm not certain. Here's my recommendations for how you should deal with this and think about this right now, and we will keep you posted. And here's what we're looking at. And just as where we stand today is uncertain, the future is really uncertain. Normally, when there's a change of administrations, it's somewhere between 6 to 9 months, sometimes a year, before any real change happens. There's always a flurry at the beginning of executive orders and reversing whatever the other guy did and some changes. But by and large, it takes time usually for appointees to come on in, learn what their agency does, learn who does what, who's in charge.
I think they've got that down now.
Yeah. But they all of that's done, And so the pace of what's going to happen here is going to be quick. On the other hand, while each agency is rushing for changes, some of the things we're going to be talking about today is not everything can be done just because they want it done. There are statutes that would require Congress to change them. There are regulations that you need to issue new regulations and change the old ones. There have to be people in those agencies left to write regulations and change regulations and put them on out of people who know what they're doing and have some experience with this. And so for the next 6 to 9 months at least, a lot of the legal advice that we're going to be giving and that you're going to be getting from your lawyers is going to be very tentative. And a lot of it is risk assessment. And fortunately for JATCs and outside programs, most of what they do is not going to have huge swings of risk. There are some, and Jim is smiling over here at the ERISA issues because, as always, the one thing you have to be fearful about is screwing up with your plan documents. And Jim is the only one here at the table who always says, you will lose your house if you don't do what he says.
We'll avoid the house.
But we'll
I'm
avoid
sure
the house.
Everyone's got great insurance.
Yeah.
It's the Pinto.
But that nice
1%
pickup truck,
chance.
that nice pickup truck that you have could be at risk. But anyway, but for most things, risk management means don't screw up and break the law now because you think it's not going to be enforced. How about that for a takeaway?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I have family from New Jersey, but I always called that the New Jersey theory of law.
Yeah.
No knock on you, which is everything's legal until you get caught. That is
No.
not the way to do it.
No.
For my Hamilton fans, everything's legal in New Jersey. Oh my gosh.
So keep your seatbelt fastened because this is a roller coaster. So
Okay, I'd like to just take a moment for some deep breathing. If anybody would like to join me in a moment of calm and zen. Okay. Yeah, like I think, so let's talk about a couple of things that might not be as, and then we're going to get to all the things that Rob just set us up for, but standards. Can we talk standards? Because there's a lot of questions. We talk about hours, the 720, the periods. So let's talk about something that feels maybe a little bit more stable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something that's in our control.
There you go.
right,
Help me, Lucas.
you mean
Help me.
Lucas, you mean like whether DOL is going to process new standards?
Well, let's start with what we can control. Right? Control the things you can control, and then let the universe deal with the rest.
Let's not borrow trouble.
Yeah. So there's a few things we know, right? We know that the Department of Labor has approved new model guideline standards, implementing this 720-hour program. And we know that, and that's true. It's out there. The model guideline standards are there. We also all know that our collective bargaining agreements and existing standards say that when the Department of Labor has approved new model guideline standards, that JATC's area-wide programs are supposed to adopt those programs, those model guideline standards. It's right there. It's in the collective bargaining agreement, in the area-wide training agreements, that when these new standards come out, it is incumbent on the committees to go through the process of reviewing the changes, making their decisions about adopting the new model guideline standards. And I think some of our programs have gone through that process. There is an issue, and I want to talk some about ratios and periods of apprenticeship. But before we get into that, going back to some of the uncertainty, is it that, as Rob has flagged, and he can talk about a little bit, unfortunately, even if our programs have gone through this process, adopted new standards, they're now on hold at the Department of Labor. And I don't know if you want to talk, Rob, just for a second.
Or the SAA.
Or the SAA, right.
We'll explain.
Although less, I think, more perhaps the state. We'll see how that works. Huh?
Right. Well, the short answer is we think that they are on hold because our standards, like those of everything else, complies with 2930, and there are portions of 2930 regulations. They conflict with the executive orders as well as some longstanding stuff. So we'll touch on that later in the podcast.
Right. 29 CFR 30. Having the executive orders, Johnson's executive orders in it.
Yeah. 2930 actually cross-references 11246, which, now we're getting.
Wait.
Let's not foreshadow.
Give me a 2-sentence, if this is possible. What is 2930 in case someone doesn't know?
29 CFR Part 30 is the section of the regulations with equal employment with equal opportunity for apprenticeship and apprenticeship issues. And it's in that section that we get all of our rules on what are covered protected classes, the affirmative action requirements, or the goals and timetables. Everything derives from 2930 regulations.
Okay.
Which then has to go in your standards.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
That's one of the exhibits in the standards.
Right. Which is a planned document, but again, no foreshadowing. Go ahead.
Jim's getting back to the plan document. Lucas.
So two questions that we hear from JATCs as they're considering adopting the new model guideline standards involve periods of apprenticeship and ratios. So we wanted to make sure that we talk about that a little bit today because we know there are a lot of questions about that. So the existing collective bargaining agreements provide that the NECA chapter and the IBEW local union pick between either 6 or 10 periods of apprenticeship. And these periods are important because that's, as everyone listening knows, that's how apprentices get a raise, right? They get their increase that way. So 6 and 10 periods always fit fine with what we colloquially refer to as the old 5-year program. That made sense to folks, and that's what they adopted. Some people perceive a shorter program, a 720-hour of related instruction program, as being incompatible with 6 and 10 periods, but really they're not. And the model guideline standards that the Department of Labor has signed off on give you options for how to implement this shorter 720-hour of related instruction program into a 6 or 10 period of apprenticeship. It might not be as easy a fit as a longer program was, but it's right there. And so we encourage folks to, don't panic, don't think that this isn't doable. Instead, take a look at the model guideline standards. They have good advice on how to make some selections between 6 and 10 periods and how you're going to roll that out. But above all, and this is always my drumbeat that I think corresponds with Jim's point that these are planned documents, it's got to be consistent across the board. So if your collective bargaining agreement says there are 10 periods of apprenticeship, then your standards also have to have 10 periods. We can't end up in a situation, or we shouldn't end up in a situation where there's a conflict between the CBA and the standards. So we're getting lots of questions about this, and our advice is step back, take a breath, look at the standards, look at the collective bargaining agreement. There are ways to navigate this without getting tripped up and without creating issues as programs start to implement the 720 hours of related instruction. The other issue we see some questions on is ratios. And this comes up not only in submitting new standards, but also we've seen some questions under the IRA, which has apprentice utilization requirements, and some questions about which ratio is appropriate. So at the end of the day, the most important piece for the folks who are listening is, what does the ratio in your standards say? But again, we got to match that ratio in the standards with the ratio that's in the collective bargaining agreement. And sometimes we negotiate a ratio in the CBA, right, to try to recapture work, or for whatever reason that gets us out of line with the ratio that a state apprenticeship agency or the Department of Labor require for our craft. And if, on an IRA project, somebody says, oh, well, we're abiding by the collective bargaining agreement ratio. If that ratio is out of whack with the DOL ratio, you're going to get dinged by the IRS.
Right. And the SAAs, depending upon the state with a different ratio, may look at your standards differently if they ever get to approving them.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely everything should work together.
Yeah.
Well, you guys are going to like this, because as we sat here, it just occurred to me that there was something we had not talked about in our preparation. Those of you who have attended any of my sessions over the last couple of years on the standards will know that there were 2 issues that the committee wanted to change from what was in the 2019 standards, which many but not all of you have approved. In addition to the 720 hour, the other one was the change to let you do anything you wanted to with your selection procedures, so long as it was legal. And this was specifically asked for so that your standards, if you wanted to do something different with any alternative selection procedure, were consistent with what you were actually doing.
Yeah,
that would be nice.
A good goal, because
because if you're selecting if you have adopted any kind of other program or any kind of other method than the one that was in the 2019 standards, that means if anybody has any challenges or you're defending them on the basis of you're not following your plain documents. So that's a serious issue. So now we are at the point where the language is in there and approved by DOL, giving you discretion to do whatever you wanted. And my advice for you, unless my dear colleagues say otherwise, is if that's something that is important to you and you have already done or want to do, adopt the new standards, submit them to ETA for approval, and maybe even submit them to DOL or your SAA for approval. And at least you will have gone through the adoption process and it hasn't been finalized. That is not going to be a absolute defense, but you're better off doing that than just changing your selection procedures and not doing anything.
Yeah, and it's a catch-22, right?
Yeah.
So you have your current standards. Those are your plan documents, and your trust, of course. I haven't seen too many trusts with the ratio in them, and then so clearly they should be copacetic. Even if it is a plan document, if it is contrary to law, then one can't actually enforce that provision of the plan document. I think what's going to end up happening is there's going to be guidance. I mean, they had that 2421 that came out, or 24.1 that said, oh yeah, we had told you to not worry about DEI. You should stop that, which in the apprenticeship context, I think everyone takes to reference all 29 CFR 30, which is still law. I mean, well, I shouldn't say it's still regulatory. And though the Supreme Court has limited the deference that a court has to show that, simultaneously, if DOL has given some indication, I know it's on the grant side, not on the standard side, that they're going to give guidance about what to do, even if it's at least to say you can't do X, Y, Z, then we're going to end up waiting for a lot of that, I think.
Well, you're right. That's the next topic we were going to talk about.
I thought I'd transition.
It's a wonderful transition. But before we get to those two issues, any disagreement with the idea that, hey, and by the way, we hadn't checked with Todd about this first, but
Todd, just go ahead and walk away if you're listening. We'll tell you when you can come back.
But yeah, I think the safer thing is still to adopt them. Choose your selection procedures, do your vetting. Adopt them, put them in your revised plan, and submit it along with whatever you want to do with the 720 and the other provisions. Everything else is pretty much the same as 2019. So if you do that, and that's going to give you some protection, and they'll be sitting there when the pipeline is open again, and whoever's left it away can approve these.
Well, and if they have enough of them, maybe it'll speed it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so I mean, one thing that you all are saying, and I know we'll continue to say, is the consistency. And I feel like that's regardless, right? If you're a JTC, AJTC operating, like consistency is critical in everything. Like whether it's your conversations with apprentices, your policies, your procedures, your like that's the biggest thing, is make sure things are consistent, right? And operating with each other, not against each other.
And I think what I would add, and not change things just through your practice, right? If you're going to make a change, you have to make that change to the standards, as Rob is saying and Jim are saying. If the bargaining parties want to make a change in the collective bargaining process, they need to make that in the collective bargaining agreement or through an MOU or whatever. Mm-hmm. But we shouldn't be making, some little day-to-day stuff. Sure, you can, make a little change here and there. Just to, how you're interacting with apprentices. We talk about this sometimes, if an instructor wants to tell people, hey, stop talking in class, we don't need a committee rule to tell you to not interrupt the instructor in class. But if you're going to change your selection procedures, you're going to change your ratios, you're going to change other things, that has to be a formal process, and the committee has to be involved in.
And on a policy level, like if it's, say, your policy, so not your standards, not your CBA, but you've decided that, from here forward, 4 absences means you're kicked out of the program, right? Or you have to repeat. Then that needs to be, when the committee confirms that, when they agree on it, that needs to be in your meeting notes. It immediately needs to go out to the apprentices, making them aware that from March 12th forward, those kind of things, right? To make sure we're just following.
That I agree. And then it goes to your policies. Mm-hmm. You probably have policies that you've adopted in that regard. Okay. And as Lucas so ably put, if your practice does not meet your writing of whatever variety, you're manufacturing your own issues. Mm-hmm. Under ERISA, you have a fiduciary duty to comply with your plan documents as long as it's consistent with law. That's the
Right.
catch-22, I think.
So since Jim has teed up already 2930, let me say that we divided up this subject into two areas, 2930 itself and compliance, and the broader, quote, DEI issues. And Jim's going to talk about ERISA in between those rather than trying to mush those together. So 29 Part 30 is a regulation. And that regulation has been operationalized and detailed for compliance in the standards, in the EEO section, and in the affirmative action plan in your standards. And all of those are required by law, 29 CFR Part 30, and that includes all of your tracking of race and gender and national origin and disability and reporting and tracking all of those numbers and having your goals and doing your annual assessment and lots of requirements that were put in by DOL, 4 or 5 years ago when they revised 29 CFR Part 30.
Mm-hmm.
That is the law. And as long as you comply with the law as written, you should not be challenged by DOL or the EEOC or anybody else. And that includes, for example, having non-discriminatory policies for sexual orientation and gender identity, and tracking people by race and national origin and gender and having goals for them in your recruitment, just as you've been doing for decades under 29 CFR Part 30. You should not, and your lawyers will tell you, do not make a change until DOL says you can. And DOL really can't say right up front, we are rescinding the parts of 29 CFR Part 30 that conflict with the White House executive orders. So when there is an executive order that says there are only 2 genders which are determined at birth and there is nothing else, let's set aside the fact that at birth, everyone is chromosomally female.
Conception, right?
Conception.
Yeah, conception. Yes.
Conception. Oh my,
Yes.
yeah, correct. At conception, nobody has X chromosomes. So there is, yes, but.
So should I in this insert who runs the world,
no.
girls?
yes, you can. But so despite the fact that that is now by executive order, and DOL can change 29 CFR Part 30 if they issue new regulations to remove gender identity and sexual orientation from 29 CFR Part 30. That's by regulation. They didn't have to adopt those procedures. And by executive order, they could, now that the 11246 got taken out as sort of a cross-reference, DOL can change those regulations and eliminate all goals, timetables, just as they did for government contractors. They can eliminate all those, or they could keep the ones for disability if they choose to, or whatever they do, but they have to issue a proposed rule, get comments, adopt it. And I think we all think that's going to happen this year sooner than later.
Yes.
But it's not high on anybody's list. But you have to comply with it until it's done. The same thing is true for Title VII. You are all covered under Title VII and the ADA and the Age Discrimination Act and the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, all of those because they apply to employers, unions, and jointly trusteed programs. So the union side of the industry has to comply with all of that. And that is the law. Right now, the EEOC has said they are not going to process complaints involving gender identity or sexual orientation.
In fact, they decided not to proceed with
They-
one
they-
down south, right? Like they were in mid-stroke, and
Yeah.
they just called it up.
They are stopping those. They are not going to. They are going. All new charges on those don't go to local offices. They come to the national office, where they're going to sit in a black hole until they change their regulations. Because, well, they need to change their regulations, but more importantly, the Supreme Court determined that those were part of sex discrimination. And
separately from
separate-
our
all-
affirmative action type
all-
decisions that are being touted
Right.
by the
all separate from the affirmative action stuff. The Supreme Court held that Congress in 72, when they added sex, decided that sex included sexual orientation, gender identity.
Mhm.
That means the EEOC can't just say it's illegal because the White House says so. The Supreme Court, they need to take a case up and change the position before Title VII changes. They can announce, and they have, they're not going to enforce it.
Well, and honestly, the other tack I think that's being taken is to have entities then challenge in litigation,
Yeah.
and then the executive agency, Department of Justice, says, you know what, on second thought, we're not going to defend this.
Mhm.
In which case, your APA, meaning you've got to go through this process of proposed regs, may be shortcutted through a preliminary injunction. You've also got Congress out there, but we'll hold off on that. Go ahead.
but don't ask me to guess what would happen with the Supreme Court if you tee up the right case that said you got it wrong on what Congress intended in 1972, and because there's been a change of administration, you should just decide that your prior decision was wrong.
Switch in time that saved time. Switch in time that saved nine.
Yeah,
where the Supreme Court comes across with
who
the
knows?
executive agency's perspective.
Yeah. Who knows? Yeah. Anyway, so 29 CFR part. So for 29 CFR Part 30 and Title VII, on all of those, you have to keep complying, folks. Do not stop. This is not a risk assessment issue, because any employee who sues you, and you can still, we are reasonably confident that just like during the prior Trump administration, the plaintiffs' bar will try to pick up some of the slack.
Mhm.
And I guarantee that in the area of LGBTQIA issues, that you will see an uptick in litigation, private plaintiffs suing you, suing contractors, suing other businesses for gender. Oh, and don't forget that many of you are in states or localities that also have state laws protecting that. This is that Venn diagram I sometimes talk about with overlapping responsibilities.
Mhm.
So you need to still comply with these laws, and you need to still be collecting data, and you can submit it to us. Do I think that data collection is going to disappear? Yeah, probably sooner than later. But for right now, you need to stay on track so that in the unlikely event of an audit or a higher risk of a lawsuit, you have been complying with the laws as written
You had said like comply until directed not to.
by the Department of Labor.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
So
a court.
Yeah.
Or court,
Yeah.
yeah,
Or Congress.
or Congress.
Because you have state.
Congress,
my
Congress is
God.
going to do something this year.
Well, yesterday they extended our budget. Well, at least the House did.
Yeah,
yeah.
I was going to say I'll believe
The
the
House
Senate
will
when
do
I see
plenty.
it.
The Senate.
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
not
this
gonna
part of the
move so
conversation is
quickly.
going to be so outdated by the time you see
Right,
it. But,
right.
Okay.
Will be interesting to see how
Yeah.
the predictions
That's kind of fun. We should do predictions at the end. No, let's not.
No, that's not.
Okay. Okay. So you keep going then. But you're complying with state and federal non-discrimination laws. I know we talked about that. Like, just keep doing what you're doing unless or until directed otherwise.
Correct.
That's right.
Okay.
and keep with your documents. The hard part, I think, is going to be that we may see different avenues of how they're going to address this. In the prior world, we would have said, oh no, it's going to be through a proposed reg and the comment and all those things. They've been working on trying to avoid that. They've got that midnight relief bill where they can just they don't have to vote on particular regs that have been passed in the last 90 days at the end of the Biden administration. They just list them all and they'll vote on it. They've got EOs, executive orders that, okay, well, that's not the force of law, right? That's an executive order. But now there are bills up there that are trying to take the executive orders and turn them into law. And it'll be very interesting to see how it all pans out. They've got a real budget issue.
Yeah, but I do think the takeaway on at least the Part 30 things
Hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and it really is just rank speculation at this point about what Congress might do, because we don't know, and the people who are going to make decisions at the agency level are not in place yet. So it is, and I think it's fun for us to like spin out on what might happen, right? But I think the practical takeaway for folks listening is hold tight. Right. And the other thing I think we may see as federal regulations on diversity, equity, and inclusion and other things are stripped away, that there's going to be more state regulation. So folks should be, and whether that applies or not to our programs may be an open question. In some places it will, some places it might not. There may be local regulations trying to tighten some of these things up. But all of that is uncertain. So it's really just a sort of put a pin in it takeaway, I think. Like, keep doing what you're doing, but keep your ears out for news, either at a federal or state level on changes.
Yeah,
Right.
Too many variables.
Way too many variables.
Yeah.
And that was going to be the episode. We at one point said, hey, everyone, put a pin in it.
Mhm.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it.
Yeah, and I think Lucas is right. There are too many variables. And although I guess Secretary of Labor was confirmed,
Mhm. Yes.
and we know some of the folks who have been nominated, OLMS and others, but I think that one of the things we have to pay attention to is there are going to, in all likelihood, be conflicts between these various the laws, the litigation, the EOs, all those things. And you're really going to need to keep on top of it with counsel. I think that's going to be one of the things. We, of course, here are going to finger on the pulse, and I'm sure Todd and everyone will want to, make sure folks are informed. But you're going to have individual circumstances you're going to have to pay attention to.
So guys, I think I can sum up the DEI point, since we are close to that, fairly short.
Am I going to cry?
No, you're not.
Okay.
Well, you may
might.
cry,
You might
Cindy, but yeah, it's not my fault.
Okay.
The executive orders, plural, on DEI and the Department of Education Dear Colleague letter to all colleges and universities about illegal DEI and the things you're seeing in the press do not apply to our JATCs. You may have grants with language about DEI, which is another whole completely different topic. And I'll tell you, if you are struggling with concerns about grant compliance, raise that separately with the Alliance. That's a whole much longer discussion about your grants and DOL grants and so forth. But in general, all of those things do not apply to the JATCs. All of our contractor members who were covered by 11246 now, and who now have to strip that out, are also being asked, as most contractors are, but this is a specific to the agency issuing the contract, to sign certifications that they are not engaging in any quote, air quotes, illegal DEI. And no one can tell you what the agency or the DOJ means right now by illegal DEI. It is a catch-all term they were using for anything that they consider to be woke. And the president said, we're no longer woke. And we can speculate based upon what the Department of Education has done and some guidance from the Department of Justice so far, how far it might go. But the issues that they are particularly concerned about on enforcement, anti-Semitism in particular, discrimination and harassment of whites, and in particular, any kinds of training programs that might make white people uncomfortable because it raises the possibility that they may have implicit biases, and on and on. But they are even lumping in, gender identity and sexual orientation in discussions as being potentially illegal DEI.
Although previously required, and certainly under 29 CFR 30.
You can't declare illegal something that's in the law. Well, you can declare it. It's going to be kind of hard. But the short answer is, in your day in and day out operations, continue complying with the law, and we'll be keeping our pulse on anything else.
Yeah.
Now, once we get more guidance from DOL or someplace else, we may be revising selection procedures. We may be revising training on how we train for selection. We'll be looking at a number of things, because we don't want to put anything out in the training, in the guidance, in the materials for JATCs to use that somebody's going to say that's illegal DEI.
Right. And it comes down to that you'll have your enforcement other places, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have the DEI and that's all in motion, but you've still got ERISA. We certainly, the IBW, we're kind of right out there in front and could expect some, I think, enforcement on the ERISA side to the extent there are people left.
Mhm.
Although if there are people left, I would guess that would be a focus for them more on the multi-employer side. And there's also the chance that all these private litigants, people are throwing around the False Claims Act and taxpayers whistleblower acts. And how would that work with respect to JTCs? Too many variables.
Mhm.
Too many
Mhm.
variables. What I think we can say should expect is that, we will be under a microscope. Do not think that because all of these things are in motion that we don't have to worry about it. You do. Now is the time, honestly, to make sure that your other policies are up to date. You're complying with them. That if the SAAs have to come in on the state level and then going to refer it to the national, or the national is going to come in on the ERISA side or on the apprenticeship side, those are things you should do now, even though we may not know exactly how the agencies are going to go about enforcing it.
Jim, or Lucas, say a little bit more about how the last Trump administration shifted. How much attention did the unionized programs get on some of these issues across the ones you deal with versus the non-union?
Yeah, it's interesting because it was actually under prior Democrat administrations where we had the big national push for the ERISA audits. It was IRAPs. There may be more of an issue for IRAPs. They want to put it back in, I'm sure, but the law was passed that DOL can't spend money on IRAPs. The bills that are up, that are legislative on the Hill, they're talking about funding, allowing 529 accounts, allowing Coverdale accounts to fund employers, to fund those accounts, and then to have that money, the individual could then use it to pay for training. What we really want to do, whether it's enforcement on the ERISA side, whether it's enforcement on the tax side for tax-exempt orgs, we're all 501c5s or C3s, that's gonna come. And whether it comes through legislation, whether it comes through an agency, I think we need prepared. What is it? Forewarned is forearmed, right?
So, Jim, we were talking about this the other day, and I hear you saying two things. One of them is just the plain old ordinary compliance with ERISA. And if for whatever reason this Department of Labor decides to turn a closer eye to some practices of jointly trusteed funds or apprenticeship programs, whether it's in what you can pay for or conflicts or anything else, that's one issue. But the other one you flagged really goes to competition for dollars and for support for registered apprenticeship versus all the alternatives. And that list of other things you were looking at on, CTE funding and IRAP and all of those competitors that are seeking private equity money or employer money to basically compete with us for the same pool of people to do training. And that Congress is starting to think a whole lot more seriously about, those funding those options instead of us.
Through the tax code.
Yeah.
So the idea would be money goes into an account, 529 account, for example, the employer gets a deduction, then they use it for whatever they need. Now, if we just need to make sure that that's, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, that the RAP system gets to take advantage of those tax changes as well. But really, the CTE programs, there can be, good things. People work with community colleges out there, how we're going to adjust to that. But the dollars, if they're going to go to the CTE programs instead of to the RAP programs, well, that's significant, grants otherwise. And our CTE apprenticeships, right? Remember, we're talking about a community college. We're talking an educational. How are they going to expand what a work-based learning is versus OJT? What we need to watch is that putting CTE apprenticeships that have far less regulation, that have less of a track record, certainly, that they are not put on par with the RAP system. The RAP system created a gold standard. We'll continue to, meet that gold standard, but we don't want to dilute the value of that gold standard with something that's not nearly as demanding.
Well, and one of the troubling things about a recent proposal on CTEs was on-the-job training for essentially high school students in dangerous industries. Yeah. So talking about 16, 17, 18-year-olds working on job sites, operating heavy equipment. To me, that's a big problem. Put aside this tension between registered programs and non-registered programs. Are we going to promote child labor or not on a dangerous work site? So there's, I think, lots of things to keep an eye on in these CTE proposals.
Big picture, CTE programs sound right. They sound like, oh, that's good, maybe. But what's more important is not to hear CTE apprenticeship and think, oh, there's no doubt about it, that's okay. Because there are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that are signing up for this. And we need to pay attention to what exactly those changes mean. We had CFR 29 that was proposed under the Biden administration, and they pulled back. And part of that was to create these CTE apprenticeships. And that was something that we weren't in favor of. And honestly, gratefully, if 29 CFR 29 proposed had come in, it would have been a much more centralized, authority at the national OA. We wouldn't have any question about whether the state's, workforce development folks, SAAs could make their own rules. And it would have been very easy. So CTEs, be aware of the legislation. We, of course, are going to be tracking it, but it's dangerous, concerning ground, I think it's fair to say. That's the enforcement. And so basically we have the courts where litigation can be filed. They don't defend. Then we have what we would normally think of, the Administrative Procedures Act. Oh, you're going to change this reg? You have to have it proposed. You have to have comment. That takes forever. Then we have the legislation where, okay, executive order, we'll turn it into a bill. How we're going to affect 29 CFR 30, we'll just legislate it. We'll put it in the law. You don't have to worry about it then. And these are all happening at the same time. And I think that the administration is somehow in the back of its mind thinking, oh, False Claims Act. We won't have these people to enforce. We're just going to encourage private folks to complain that somehow the government was harmed in some financial way. So it is in motion.
I feel like I just did Schoolhouse Rock for a minute. I was like, oh, who's singing? Who's going to do?
I'm just a bill.
Yeah. Just a bill.
Just a bill.
Sorry.
One
Good.
pattern that, and I'd be curious about your thoughts on this, Jim, that we've seen in the past with administration changes at the Department of Labor, right? There's all these groups that enforce different laws. There's the folks who enforce wage and hour laws, minimum wage, overtime. There's folks who enforce prevailing wage requirements. There's the folks that are responsible for enforcing ERISA rules. There's folks that enforce in the Office of Labor Management Standards who enforce all the rules that apply to unions. And right now we're in this period where there's these massive cuts across the board to staff. And so I think that throws the pattern off a little bit. But what we've seen in the past is cuts to, and for in administrations like the current administration, cuts to the enforcement arms for wage and hour, for prevailing wage, but a beefing up of the enforcement arms for the ERISA, for EBSA, for OLMS, these bodies that enforce the ERISA rules for JATCs or rules for unions. So I'm curious, and it's very much remains to be seen, whether despite all the cuts to the federal government workforce that we're seeing, they're still going to sort of move resources around to put more people in enforcement for those areas.
I don't think enforcement for OLMS, which is the union side of DOL, I would be surprised if they would decrease that enforcement.
Right.
I think that the LM filings, the LM 10s for employers that, give something of value that has to go on a report for a union, representative, or the LM 30s where union officer, union employee has to report what they've gotten. I think that will become the persuader rule, which is part of the LM 10. I think those things will go away. I think that things that would make it more difficult and demanding for unions to report, which often keys to enforcement, will get more stringent, and they'll go through those processes.
Yeah, I'm more thinking even just about staffing levels, right? Not even regulatory changes.
Will they have the bodies?
Who's going to enforce this, and are there people who will be there?
Yeah, if they were going to keep anybody, I would say
that's what I think.
The enforcement side that would tend to focus on certainly unions and on multi-employer plans. I think I'd be surprised if that.
So what we have seen across Republican administrations, when over decades of watching this go back and forth on the pendulum, deregulation or softer penalties for enforcement on employers. And so getting rid of rules and regs in general. But the flip side, but here you're looking at where can I save money, not just on people, but by eliminating offices, programs, complete areas of deregulation. The flip side is where can I generate more revenue? Mm-hmm. So I and that's where I'm surprised at any kind of cuts to the IRS, because some point here, in order to balance things, you need that, and anything that can generate revenue from settlements and is a net gain in areas are ones that you might see increased.
I really think that they're going to be trying to expand the ability of private litigants to go and enforce, whether this will be efficient, how they're going to do it. There are a lot of open questions. I think the administration will focus on that when they are criticized for lack of enforcement. Tax-exempt organizations, if you're a terrorist and you're linked, then there's a lot of thought that they'll just revoke. They'll deregulate to the extent that they can on the employer side. I don't think they'll deregulate in the sense of make things easier on the union side.
Or JATCs. Right?
Or JATCs. And I think on the ERISA side, EBSA, Employee Benefit Security Administration, they're going to want to make it easier and not as demanding for some types of arrangements for employee benefits. ESOPs, I think that they'll probably have some guidance that might be helpful. But I do think that to the extent that anybody's left, I think there'll be more of a focus on the multi-employer world. It remains to be seen. If they figure out a way to have private litigants come in and enforce parts of ERISA, they'll try and make that easier. On the tax side, there's a whistleblower tax law where private litigants come in, like the False Claims Act, and say, oh, here the FISC has been harmed, and we think this money should be going into the Treasury, and it hasn't. So we're going to file a lawsuit. Government doesn't pick it up, long process, and they've got litigation coming in. Now, is that a good way to do it? That's another question, but I would be very surprised if, no matter what the changes are, that it makes it easier for multi-employer plans. There may be some things, or makes it easier for unions, or makes it easier for DEI, quote unquote. How, when, uncertain. Soon.
Yeah. So the one other thing we talked about that was not.
Wait 1 second.
I'm sorry.
Why did you point at Lucas when you said terrorist? I wanted to jump there before we go further. Is there something we should know?
No, I think it was more.
I know.
Lucas and I had a short
It was just
conversation
great.
about
I
how
was like,
is
oh
this-
gosh, that's not good, Lucas.
Not a terrorist.
I know. And I knew that. I knew that. Sorry. Okay.
I have terrorized some, but I don't.
So, not to lay one more sort of heavy thought on everything, but we had a brief discussion on the other day about the demand side. And we got three lawyers here who are not going to talk macroeconomics, other than to state a couple obvious things about Washington. You know, if there are recessionary pressures this year, we all know what that is. We've all been through them before. But in any change of administration, there are changes in budget priorities. And the more discretion that the administration is given out of this budget bill to move things around or reallocate, the more there will be winners and losers picked. And one example of that was the executive order on clean energy that basically said we weren't going to be investing in clean energy and canceling contracts and grants wherever they could, and saying we're going to drill, build, baby drill, whether you guys want to do so or not. But the winners and losers, and I know both Nick and IBW are watching this all very, very closely and monitoring and trying to influence and keeping track and lobbying on all of that. But there are headwinds coming economically, which the president has acknowledged might happen as a result of all these changes. And that inevitably has a demand side in projects and the types of projects that are available.
And those that are in the pipeline.
And those that are in pipe, even those that
or
are
will
in
not
pipeline.
be in the pipeline.
Yeah, you know, on that side. And at the same time, we know that the supply of journey workers is going to continue to weaken. We all know the challenges we already have
Demographically.
and yet in past recessions, there's been an immediate reaction of we don't need these people, so we need fewer apprentices, and then it comes back to bite us a couple of years later. And we've seen that through recession after recession in cycles. So these are just things that everybody is watching, and some insight might come out of the resolution of the budget, but I'm not optimistic we're going to know a lot for months.
And how the Senate, it's going to be very difficult. I mean, there are things that were passed by the House may impact grants, all those funding, all those sorts of things, very technical, but we don't know what the House will do. I think, well, the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure, all of those things, how the administration will act towards them, and how Congress, there's stuff out there in Congress that says we're repealing the whole thing. And maybe because they need the money, right? If it's Medicare or that, how are they going to pick? There's other stuff out there that says we'll get rid of this part or this part, but leave the rest of it there. And many Republican states have benefited from.
Absolutely. I mean, these projects are popular projects. That's what's sort of perplexing about all of this. You've got President Trump saying repeal the CHIPS Act, and then others saying, no, why would we do that? These are great projects for areas with a high concentration of people who voted for Trump, and they're going to bring great permanent jobs to these depressed regions. If we're talking about bringing manufacturing back, does it make any sense in the next breath to say we're going to get rid of this, this bill that really has done amazing things to promote manufacturing in the United States? So part of me thinks that the folks in Congress, the folks in the White House have no idea what they want to do on this stuff. They want to make noise about it. They want to be seen to be making changes that they think people like, but I haven't seen anything concrete yet.
No.
Right? It's a lot of noise right now, but with almost zero real change.
Right.
And
People
we
are
may
putting
see
in
that.
bills, but who knows how it works out.
Right. And we know, because we've lived in Washington a long time, there's lots of bills, messaging bills that happen every Congress that never go anywhere. So
11% of bills actually ever even come close to.
Yeah. And most of them are just kind of noise. So I think it's important to not get too caught up in the noise, too caught up in the worry. But as Rob said, I think the practical piece here is, my takeaway is not let's shut down the pipeline of apprentices, because we do see over and over again that if we stop bringing in apprentices, right, during recession, before a recession, and then we come out of it, then the unionized sector of the industry's lost market share. And it happens over and over again.
Right. I think that's entirely right. And that all argues for going along and doing all of the things that we've been doing before until it's clear that that's not what's going on. It can come from the issue. It can come from so many different avenues, right? Courts, Congress, agency, all these different things.
So you don't worry. Let us do the worrying for you.
We're professional.
That's kind of what I heard.
We're professional worriers.
It's like, but it's the noise. And I mean, my gosh, we could talk about all different areas of life, right? Where noise just becomes debilitating. And I think that as people, we have so much access to information, but it's not always accurate, and so I think that could be part of this struggle is there's so much happening, so much impacting us professionally, personally, and it's just loud, and your head is booming and your heart is racing. And it's like, okay, get out of the noise for a minute, take some deep breaths. What's actually, what is do it until you're told not to, right? Where is that moment in this?
And I agree.
You have to, because we're sitting together.
Well, no, truly. I mean, you can't, and I say this often, you're doing, from my point of view, God's work. And these are good things, and it is difficult, but we move forward, and we have to do it on a practical level. Simultaneously, too much information, inaccurate information, that's bad. But knowing enough to realize that if you see some changes happening, like we wouldn't think of the tax code and 529, educational accounts is somehow coming our way, or the CTE apprenticeships up. Oh, that's education side. Well, what I've heard is, if we have this CTE apprenticeship and the Perkins all education, but if the education department goes away or can't handle it, we'll just send that over to DOL. And they could administer it like WIOA. And WIOA will be reauthorized, and we can expect that process will bring changes for us. That process is not now. I mean, it's coming, for sure. And so knowing that we have these things that seem unrelated, but paying attention to it and realizing what it could be coming our way. I think that's important. But you can't have too much noise.
Right. So yeah, can't bury your head in the sand. However, there's got to be an awareness, and we've got to, I mean, how long have we been saying this? Check your resources. Don't think that because you read a few articles, you're now, a litigator or, whatever. Like, go to the expert, like be aware, and then trust but verify kind of moment, right?
And it's the kind of the ERISA standard, it's process.
Yeah.
And so what you really need to do is, and this can be difficult, know what it is you don't know
Yes.
as a fiduciary, and going and asking for professional help.
Mm-hmm.
I think this would be a moment that professional help from the folks like us would be real important, and we hope serve them well. I mean, it's just too hard to even sift through it all.
Yeah, this moment is pushing me to different kinds of professional help.
Well,
Same.
I was just going to say, keep your lawyers on speed dial and pay them well for doing the worrying for you.
Well, that won't do you any harm
I know.
either, right?
No.
Yeah.
And your therapist.
And
I
your
feel
therapist.
like there's
Mhm.
two speed dial
Well,
numbers.
We're just caught up in our little, not so little, but apprenticeship world, right?
Yes.
I mean, there's everything else going
Right.
on. And for the IRA and infrastructure and chip, all those stuff, well, do they keep it, but then get rid of the apprenticeship utilization? Unknown. Do they keep the apprenticeship utilization, but then say CTE programs satisfy that? Unknown. We don't know. Are those things being teed up? Yes. Only 11% of what's being teed up will ever become law, and they may have to do it in other ways. Now, and all of us want to say, well, this is how it works. You have the Administrative Procedures Act, and these are the things you have to follow. But that hasn't been paid a lot of attention to lately.
It hasn't. I mean, the courts are shutting down
We have the
a great
preliminary
deal
injunctions.
of the action that this administration has taken that has come outside of these normal processes. And it doesn't mean that we don't know the future of that either. But I do, if I had to make a prediction, I think we might see some slowing of this just wrecking ball approach to change, and some return, not completely, but some return to a more sort of formal process.
And I've seen statistics about how many actions by Biden administration have been overturned by courts, how many actions of, the Trump administration before that. What was their batting average? I won't predict batting averages for this administration, but boy, there's a lot out there that can be certainly subject to the preliminary injunctions we've seen. Now, what consequence? What happens? If you fire all these people, are they going to come back? I mean, how does that work? And it's just uncharted territory.
Yeah.
And is that where we kind of I know we said there's all these topics on everyone's mind. Obviously, we don't have them here, but you've touched on a ton. And it's there's just so much that we would have to say we don't know. We'll keep you posted. I mean, that's we'll keep you updated. I mean, that's kind of where we land on a lot of things right now.
Where we started. It's an
We're back
unprecedented
to-
time of uncertainty. There's a lot of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot in all of this that any of us can control, but you can monitor and educate yourself and consult with those, and we will keep you posted. And you just have to understand that there will be answers eventually, and heaven forbid, patience.
Ooh, stop.
Yes, this is going back to find your Zen moments and don't stick your head in the sand, but maybe just go out fishing.
Puppy yoga, puppy yoga.
And no, whatever happens, we really don't expect it to be so great for RABs. I mean, hopefully it won't be so bad. But now, really, truly, if you want to help yourself in these times of uncertainty, go back to your basics, make sure your documents all match up, make sure you're following your delegations, like who's supposed to be deciding this, document process, You document compliance with your various, policies, and get ready for things that could come your way. Because we don't know what they are, but
Right.
you need to dot your I's and cross your T's. Now's the time.
And we're back to what we can control,
Yeah.
right? You can't,
Well,
I mean, there's so many what ifs we would.
They can also control coming to New Orleans or NTI.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
And this is not a plug, but since I didn't make it, yes, like take advantage of the moments that we can be together, that we can chat with each other, that we can get this kind of conversation and advice. And because New Orleans, end of April, like going to be different. Come NTI in July, going to be different. Like there's going to be new information.
And I would say it is very helpful to us and the general cause, right, the RAB system, to hear what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Has your grant been denied? Did you get a letter? Good. Please tell us. Please send it in.
Right.
Are you hearing your state at the state level? They're going to be changing these things. And geez, that sounds funny. Yeah, we want to hear about that. If you notice something that's going on legislatively or regulatory because of where you are, let us know, because that's how we can help.
Mm-hmm.
everyone.
Knowledge is power, right? Like,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
okay, so I want to, to me, this was a heavy episode. We've talked about hard topics and that kind of thing, but like this one, just a lot of information with an equal amount of uncertainty. And so I just, for the listeners, like, please keep doing the good work you do. Like, please keep be good to people. Let's take care of each other. Like those things, to my knowledge, at least, there's no law against them yet. We don't want anyone to be discouraged by hearing this. These things are happening, right? And we can't control them, but we've been given a lot of information as to what we can control, what we can do for ourselves, and the fact that we do have experts in a bunch of different fields and areas that can come in and advise. Even if the advice is, we're waiting to see, you've got somebody waiting to see. And I think for me, that's relief. I don't have to figure it out. There's people that understand this stuff, right? And they will. And I think just for the listeners, knowing that we're always here to support. We're always here to support, provide information, resources. We do it in moments like this. We do it at events. We do it by phone calls and emails, whatever. And so I just want people to take that deep breath, take it all in, because awareness, education, knowledge, we need it. And then just breathe, get your puppy or your cat or your horse. I don't know.
COVID.
We got through COVID. And we were talking about uncertainty, unprecedented.
Same stuff. And
don't know.
For the COVID stuff, if you remember, we got that related instruction, computer-mediated learning.
Yes.
Can satisfy. Okay, well, that little morsel came out of great uncertainty and anxiety.
Yes.
But we pay attention. We see if there are opportunities for us. We pay attention to what might not be so great for us. And we do the best we can, and we rely on each other and act collectively, which is, I think, the strength.
We're going to hang out a lot. This is what I just heard. And everyone's running. Why are you all running out of the studio? Like, sit back. Let's talk. Seriously, like, I really think we might have to do this again sooner than later, like just to fill the gaps in between our events. And it may not be in studio because that's not always practical, but even if we got on Zoom and just recorded it and put it out as an audio podcast, if there's something that we feel like, no, we should probably try to get this out as wide as we can. So just don't block my emails or texts or anything is essentially what I'm saying. But thank you. Like, I thank you all a lot because I think you're amazing and wonderful people. Then in your roles, like, wow, I feel like the ETA and our industry is so fortunate to have you all at our side. And you are like, you're warriors with us. You're not just like, here's some advice, go on. Like, you're a part of this. And I think that's really important and special and unique.
It's a mutual admiration society. We very much appreciate certainly the Alliance and VTSI, but we also appreciate all the people out there who we're really want to help and let us help you and tell us how we can help you. And I think that's that. We're for you, we're relying on you, and we want to help.
And so the new email address is legal advice. I'm kidding. There is no new email address. There is not. Well, thank you all so much. We'll let you get back to what changed in the time that we've been
Right,
recording.
exactly.
Like, stay tuned.
That's not a joke.
Stay
That's
tuned.
just-
Sadly, we're going to check our phones here in just a second and find out that most of this was wrong, and we'll see if we have time to re-record. If you don't hear a new episode, all is well temporarily. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
you.
Cindy.
All right, saying it again, please remember this was recorded on March 12th, 2025. So keep that in mind when you're listening, as information may have changed since then. Thank you, Jim, Lucas, and Rob. I learn something new every time we talk or I hear you present. Thank you for your dedication and commitment to our industry and for sharing your experience with us. Thank you for your friendship to the ETA and for being so much fun to work with. I love it. Big thanks to you, the listeners, for taking your time to join us. Remember, we want to hear from you. If there are topics you would like us to cover, send me an email, saywhat, SAYWATT, @electricaltrainingalliance.org. Our next episode will drop in April. Until then, you can stay connected with us through our newsletters, blog posts, and be sure to follow us on social media, subscribe to the podcast, tell someone about it. Stay powered up, and we will see you next time.
Say what?